In any movie, whatever it may be, good characterization always matters, even if it's a big bombastic blockbuster. After all, many of Hollywood's biggest franchises first became popular partly thanks to their skill at crafting memorable, fleshed-out characters. Alternatively, on the other side of the coin, you have many movies which were ruined by getting their characters wrong. In fact, there are plenty of cases where a single character manages to fatally undermine their entire movie all on their own. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture here with 10 characters that single-handedly ruined recent movies. Number 10. Little Rock in Zombieland Double Tap. In the decade between the Zombieland films, the careers of leads Jesse Eisenberg, Woody Harrelson, and Emma Stone have gone from strength to strength. For Abigail Breslin, it's a completely different story. She's just as talented as she has always been, but she frequently hasn't got the stellar roles she's deserved in recent years. Therefore, many no doubt hoped that the long-delayed Zombieland sequel would give her an opportunity to really show off what she can do. Unfortunately, things didn't work out like that, since Zombieland Double Tap fatally mishandled Breslin's character, Little Rock. Not only was the character annoying as hell this time around, she suddenly ditches the three people she's been with for the past decade for no clear reason, but she spends most of the film separated from them in a pointless chemistry-free romance with a hippie. The parts involving the other three leads are perfectly fine, yet the Little Rock subplot drags the whole film down and makes it quite a slog even though it's only 90 minutes long. Number 9. Black Adam in Black Adam. At the end of the day, the backbone of any superhero film is the lead superhero of the story. If they don't work, then chances are the film itself will falter. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened with Black Adam, a box office bomb that was arguably the final nail in the coffin for the DCEU. There were two key issues with the titular hero. Firstly, the film turned a character who was actually a villain in the comics into an anti-hero in a way which didn't feel organic at all, thus alienating fans of the source material. And secondly, Black Adam himself is such a boring protagonist. Even though there's some potentially thought-provoking backstory for him, the film never realizes that in a compelling way on screen. And there's also the issue of casting. Dwayne Johnson is such a delightful movie star, and one is always reluctant to diss him, but in all honesty, he wasn't right for Black Adam. Johnson has always excelled in more energetic, comedic roles, and he was ill-suited for this stoic, understated superhero. The character needed an actor who could subtly convey a lot, and while Dwayne Johnson has many strengths, understated acting isn't one of them. Number 8. SAFIN in No Time to Die. Let's be honest, SAFIN is one of the worst Bond villains ever. Not only is he far too derivative of past Bond villains, but he has no personality, he barely even appears, and the way in which he suddenly swung from wanting revenge on Spectre to wanting to kill millions was just ridiculous. Also, it will never ever be believable that this garden variety villain was the guy who single-handedly destroyed Spectre and killed James Bond himself. Because this villain was so unconvincing, nothing about No Time to Die's action storyline feels truly suspenseful or believable. Instead, the emotional impact of Bond's demise is undermined by the fact that he was killed by some random villain he'd never met before, rather than someone with actual personal significance. If you think about it, the inadequacy of this villain confirms that No Time to Die is a long way from the upper-tier Bond film that some described it as. Number 7. Norman in Don't Breathe 2. Now, unlike the other characters on this list, Norman, a blind man who is actually a ruthless and incredibly lethal killer, was once a great character. In the original Don't Breathe, he was a brutally effective villain, but the film's sequel mishandled the character so badly that not even Stephen Lang's continued fine work in the role could save the movie. Despite some strong acting and solid technical values, Don't Breathe 2 shot itself in the foot with one of the most misjudged creative decisions in any recent horror movie. The film turned Norman into the protagonist. Essentially, this sequel expects viewers to side with a thug, a rapist, and a murderer who committed many horrific acts of violence throughout the original, and it never explicitly mentions Norman's terrible past at all. This makes for a sequel that's uncomfortable viewing at best and deeply problematic at worst, and it honestly does ruin the entire movie. Number 6. Knock Lan in Downsizing. Like many a frustrating cinematic failure before it, Downsizing starts out okay. Unfortunately, as soon as Knock Lan, a Vietnamese activist downsized against her will, arrives, the film falls apart beyond all repair. It stops focusing on anything interesting and instead becomes the story of a chemistry-free romance between Knock and protagonist Paul. In fact, quite a lot of the film is just the two of them cleaning people's flats. To make matters worse, Knock is also an incredibly grating character who was apparently designed as comic relief, but is instead as unfunny as it gets. The character does have a thought-provoking backstory, but this was ultimately another one of the many things the movie failed to realize on screen in a satisfying way. Number 5. Peter Rabbit in Peter Rabbit. The cast and visuals of Peter Rabbit were good and some of the jokes landed, so this could have been a good family film if only they hadn't insisted on making the titular character so detestable. This movie's Peter Rabbit is an arrogant, snarky, selfish and obnoxious prick in every possible way, and he also seems to be a total psychopath. In an early scene, he joyously celebrates after his human nemesis, Farmer McGregor, dies of a heart attack in front of him. The rest of the movie revolves around his conflict with McGregor's great-nephew, Thomas, who has come to sell the estate. Essentially, the movie is a completely unlikable CGI animal tormenting and bullying Thomas, an anxious and unhappy man whose only crime was trying to keep the rabbits out so that they wouldn't ruin the house's garden, which is perfectly fair when you're trying to sell a house. He even deliberately gives Thomas an allergic reaction at one point. As a result, instead of being the fun film it could easily have been, Peter Rabbit is far too mean-spirited and it leaves a very nasty taste behind. Number 4. MODOK in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. When MODOK first appears, the Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania's credibility vanishes just like that. It's hard to imagine many were able to continue taking the film seriously after this uncanny valley eyesore first makes his appearance. And it's harder still to figure out how the hell this even ended up in the finished film. Seriously, this movie cost $200 million. Couldn't they afford some quarter-decent CGI? It doesn't stop there though. It would have made so much more sense for MODOK to be the lead villain, given that the character has a past connection with Ant-Man and is his nemesis in the comics. But given that the film forced future MCU big bad Kang the Conqueror into a story that didn't really suit him, MODOK is instead relegated to a supporting villain in a very jarring way. Worse still, the character is a fantastically dire, painfully unfunny joke of a side villain, who eventually, in what is probably the worst redemptive arc in superhero movie history, sacrifices himself while yelling, "I am not a dick." Essentially, MODOK represents everything that is killing the MCU right now. Number 3. Wanda Maximoff in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is yet another movie that could have been saved with just one key change. Get a different villain. Not long before, the MCU had released WandaVision, which was all about Wanda Maximoff overcoming the grief of losing Vision during the events of Avengers Infinity War. But Doctor Strange 2, instead of maintaining even the slightest semblance of continuity, progressed the character into a genocidal, mass-murdering psychopath. From her petty, unbelievable motivations of wanting to reunite with her imaginary children from WandaVision, to her painfully bad character arc, complete with an insulting faux redemptive ending, everything about Wanda in Doctor Strange 2 is just plain wrong. As such, the film's main action storyline was pretty much ruined, especially since Wanda was far too overpowered for the film to have any real tension. And given the flagrant disrespect to the franchise's continuity, this whole plotline gave the strong impression that Marvel Studios just don't care about small things like continuity or character development anymore. Number 2. Helena Shaw in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Say hello to Helena Shaw, cinema's worst goddaughter. On paper, having Indiana Jones working with a more morally ambiguous character who represented the kind of archaeologist he used to be when he was a lot younger wasn't a bad idea at all. The trouble was that they completely messed up Indiana Jones's goddaughter. The film doesn't allow her to grow at all, and when the film concludes, she seems to be the same obnoxious, arrogant, and selfish piece of work that she was at the start of the movie. She's a completely unlikable character. Taken on its own terms, this Indiana Jones film isn't even a terrible one. But it is dragged down a lot by this character, especially since the titular hero himself often plays second fiddle to her, and Helena Shaw makes the prospect of revisiting Indiana Jones's final adventure a pretty daunting one. Number 1. Kate Ward in Army of the Dead. Kate Ward, the whiny and unlikable daughter of Dave Bautista's protagonist Scott, was the one thing that really tipped the scales and made Army of the Dead the complete dumpster fire it ended up being. Of course, annoying side characters are a fairly common occurrence in horror movies, but what makes this particular case so bad is just how much this character's storyline ruins the movie. Firstly, she's part of a dreadful family drama subplot. She and her father are estranged after the death of her mother, because of course they are, which is constantly slowing the movie down and messing with its tone. And secondly, she keeps on making stupid decisions and getting all of the other far more likable characters killed. It's no exaggeration to say that she was the character viewers wanted to die the most, but she ends up as the only survivor at the end of the movie. And that's everything for this list. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell. Also head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.